So something made me really quite angry this week. Not something that really deserves it, like, Syria. That's all just making me quite sad. What I'm talking about instead is something that I heard on a podcast for the radio show This American Life. Just setting that up so that you know that I know that the first thing that's made me angry enough to rant about it in a video like this for months is something really petty and trivial. Major humanitarian crises, I sigh wearily and feel helpless. An opinion I disagree with on National Public Radio, grrr. Anyway, they were talking about a charity called Give Directly, which, as you might be able to guess, aims to help poor people around the world by directly giving them some money. The idea being that the people themselves know what they need, what will most improve their lives better than anyone else. And so we can cut out a lot of the admin and infrastructure costs by just letting them invest in their own lives in ways that make sense to them. There's a lot to like about this idea, and there are also certain reservations and concerns which can't just be dismissed out of hand. It's not some panacea, it's not the one right way to do things. But, I think this is an interesting idea that has the potential to really help a lot of people in the right circumstances if it's done properly. And because it's a new idea, it hasn't really been tested that much, we don't know fully the economic impact of doing something like this. It seems like what we need to do to make sure that it works, to make sure we're doing as much good as possible, to actually test the idea out, is to get some science up in this bitch. If we really want to know whether this method of charitable giving is actually helping people, randomised controlled trials. Take a load of poor people, split them into groups, free money to one group, sorry losers, better luck next time to the other. Make sure you're controlling for any compounding variables. Do a bunch of other incredibly complicated and difficult sciencey stuff, which I can just demand in half a dozen words and make it sound easy. Publish the results, and then we might actually know something. There are some promising anecdotes about it working well. The reporters in the story spoke to some people who'd used the money to buy a new roof for their home, so that it doesn't leak all the time and constantly have to be replaced with a new roof of this particular kind of crappy grass that you have to make roofs out of. It seems like that's an investment that's making a massive change to people's quality of life and is actually saving them money in the long term. It's a pretty persuasive example of a really strong positive impact being made. But is it really that straightforward? Is that actually what's going on? Are those positive effects typical? Or are most of these Kenyans who are being lifted out of poverty blowing all their newfound wealth on cocaine and hookers? Are there tensions which then build up between the people who get the money and the people who don't? It looks like it's doing some good, but is that good outweighed by negative side effects, or is it being misattributed at all? This is what scientific trials are for. This is how we know homeopathy doesn't work, for instance. There were plenty of promising anecdotes for that as well, along the lines of, I had a cold and then I drank some water which used to have some arsenic in it and then it got better. But actually, when you look at thousands of people who've taken homeopathic remedies, exactly the same thing happens to them as people who don't. It turns out that although good things sometimes happen to you after you take a homeopathic remedy, none of that good is really attributable to the magic water. And we know that because of randomized control trials which have produced a lot of data. So if we could do the same thing again with giving money directly to poor people, we might find out that we've hit upon a really useful, cost-effective way of alleviating poverty and improving people's lives. And there are some initial trials along these lines in process. The people behind Give Directly seem quite keen to gather more data and test whether their idea works. But there's another charity called Favour International who also do a lot of great work alleviating poverty, essentially by buying people cows and other livestock, which they can then milk and breed and raise a sustainable income from. And the producers of the radio show spoke to someone who worked for them as well, and they said, it sounds like an experiment. And we're not about experiments. These are the lives of real people. We have to do what we believe is correct. We can't make experiments with people's lives. They're people. It's too important. Where to begin? Look, I get that experiments on people sounds like a scary thing, but the words themselves are not the problem. They're just a bunch of noises. The reason they sound scary is that, historically, it's tended to refer to things like eugenics, or maybe deliberately giving people diseases to see what happens to them. Often people with different colour skin than you, who you don't really care that much if something bad happens to them. That's what human experimentation tends to be referring to. But that's really not comparable to what's being suggested here. All we're talking about is taking a scientific look at how well a particular charitable practice actually helps people. Calling that out of bounds because it's experimenting on people is like accusing somebody of being a Nazi because they breathe oxygen, just like Hitler did. Yes, it is people's lives we're talking about, and those are really important. And that's why it is vital that we try to find out whether the huge amounts of money that are being thrown at the massive problem of global poverty are actually helping people and their lives as much as they possibly could be, or whether there isn't something else we could be doing with the money which would be even more helpful. Honestly, we have to do what we believe is correct. We can't make experiments. Some people believe that slicing the clitoris off all young girls is the correct thing to do, but if they ever took the time to look at the facts and seriously examine the results of that idea and the effects it has on people and their lives, in other words, if they ever did an experiment on people, they might have to rethink their idea of what's correct. Now, Favour International seem to be a really good charity who do a lot of good work and who are run by good people who are trying really hard to help and making a massive change in the world. I'm a fan of theirs. I absolutely don't mean to denigrate them by this hideous comparison. adjacent to the practice of female genital mutilation. But what I'm getting at is that you cannot just maintain some sort of ethical blinkers on this subject, which blind you to a scientific understanding of your own field, just because it involves these two concepts of experiments and people, which you find it scary to put side by side. The charity is not in danger of being taken over by Joseph fucking Mengele. Nobody's suggesting that we graft extra limbs onto people in Kenya who don't have much money to see what happens to them. We're looking at the world to try to understand how it works a little better. That's what experiments are. Just look a little more closely and carefully at the result to see whether it's actually doing as much help as it seems on the surface. It's incredibly frustrating when people hear all that and then inside their brains it turns into something sinister. I was listening to this new story on the podcast version of This American Life, and I didn't actually start shouting out loud at this point in the recording because I was walking down a public road, but in my head I was using nearly the same tone as I do when the cat starts getting overexcited and biting my toes. No, that's not how it... No, bad. And I'm pretty sure I was making a lot of facial... Like, I definitely wasn't talking out loud. I definitely can tell the difference between the thoughts in my head and voices saying things in the real world. Who said that? But for a few seconds, I'm fairly sure I was actually sort of gurning, contorting with fury and indignation while I walked along the high street. Sort of like... Which I think probably looked a bit silly. Which is good, because it should look ridiculous when I get all indignant like that. Because, you know, otherwise I might start taking myself seriously. And that's just no way to live. So yeah, I decided I was going to have to write an angry thing for my blog about that particular point. But then later I thought it might work better as a video. Not least because you could then get to see my face and understand the full extent of my puny rage. So yeah, I'm taking advantage of having the house to myself while my wife's at work on a Sunday to shout into a camera for a bit. Yeah, my wife. Yeah, I've got a wife now. I got married. Yeah. That's not her. She's a person. That's just a... But yeah, got myself a wife now. Didn't have one of those last time I made a video yet. Had a fiancée at the time, but then she upgraded. She leveled up. She evolved? No, that doesn't sound right. Sounds like in another 2 years I'd have Charizard or something. Is that how that works? And no, Kirsty, that doesn't mean Charizard is my suggestion for a baby name. Anyway, yeah, that was the one rant I just wanted to get off my chest. It's taken a bit longer, I think, than they usually do. Probably longer than the attention span of most people on YouTube by now. So I'll leave it there. One more thing quickly before I go. If you do enjoy the videos that I occasionally put up like this, if you get anything out of this at all, then I'd be really grateful if you could show your appreciation a little bit and just consider starting a really horrible and irrelevant argument about racism in the comments section. Because I don't think I've had even one of those yet, and it feels like I'm missing out on an important rite of passage here. So, thanks.